Well, good morning, everybody. It is a beautiful, hot Saturday morning here in Southern California, and we are starting the Composers Symposium. So, welcome. If this is the first time you're joining us, the whole point of these symposiums, can't even say it, these symposiums is for you to ask me questions, to get feedback on your compositions. Hello, Robert. Welcome. And for us to just discuss composing and the things that we love, music and Mahler. I discuss Mahler a lot, so there you go. But yeah, so if you're here live, go ahead and start posting your questions in the chat. Hello, Ilka. Good morning. Hello, Clark. I hope everybody had a good week. And hold on, I think my mic's a little bit low right now. Did a lot of musical stuff. I spent quite a bit of this week practicing trumpet. I'm gearing up here to start doing some little jazz gigs around town. Hello, Ross. Welcome. Good evening in Scotland. But yeah, I've been playing a lot of jazz trumpet and just getting ready. My dad recently bought a bass guitar, and he's picking that up again. He used to play like 30 years ago, but he's getting back into some jazz, and we're going to try to do some little gigs around town at coffee shops. Not so much for money, just really for fun and the pleasure of performing and playing music and jazz together. But I can say, as a composer, it is highly practical and a good idea to do some kind of improv at some point. It doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be jazz, and it doesn't have to be in front of an audience, but just practice it. Just practice, improvising pieces, because that's how you discover new little tricks and things that you like, new chords, really by accident. And you can identify what it is that are your go-to chords and go-to progressions and melodic things, and I think they pop out a lot more when you improvise. And in a sense, you can identify them to stop using them or to modify them or to, move on to something new and cool. So improvising, something that everybody should be doing. Clark's got a question here. He said, would you say it is possible for a composer to get good at composing without being particularly good at playing an instrument? Well, it's possible, yeah. I mean, the mental processes and the what you're doing playing an instrument is very different than what you're doing composing, and so yeah, you don't have to be an amazing player or virtuoso or anything like that to be a great composer, and the history of composing is riddled with guys that are not so good at playing. For instance, Berlioz, I think, was not so good piano player. Wagner was known to be a bad piano player, and I'm sure there's lots and lots of other bad players out there. But that being said, I've never heard one really experienced composer tell me, oh, man, I wish I wasn't this good at piano, or I wish I was worse at piano. It's the opposite. They all say, I wish I was really good at piano, and if there was one thing that I should be really working on is my piano chops. And the reason is because piano allows you to test out ideas really quickly, and if you can play what you write, you can make your way through a lot of material without having to take it to the computer. You're not locked in the way you are with the computer. And just the facility, being able to pick up a book of music and sight read through it, to analyze things if you're reading music theory or you're looking at a score, being able to work out the parts on the piano, it's an invaluable instrument. And that's not to say that other instruments aren't good for you. I mean, I'm a trumpet player. I play saxophone. I'm marginal on clarinet. I know my violin enough to be able to figure out fingerings, and I play guitar as well. So I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I play a lot of different things. However, piano is still, it's the core of my compositional thinking. It's really where I go to work out my complex ideas. And in particular, I like a real piano. I've got a baby grand out in my living room that I got for free. Tip for everybody: if you want a piano, go on Craigslist and just start typing in free piano, and eventually, and I think there's ways you can set up notifications on Craigslist as well. But yeah, just start looking for a free piano, because eventually something pops up that's not in bad shape. You'll probably have to either pick it up yourself or hire some piano movers, but you're saving yourself probably $500 or $1,000 doing that. And there's just something special about having your own real piano, not a MIDI keyboard, not some digital, VST or whatever. It's real, it's vibrating right in front of you, and you can feel the vibrations. It's just a really cool thing to have. So yeah, that's what I did. I went on Craigslist, I found a free piano. So Clark, hopefully that answers your question. No, you don't have to be an amazing player. However, I would not avoid learning or improving on whatever instrument that you do play. And everybody, absolutely everybody, should have the basic chops on piano. I mean, I'm talking like, you should be able to play inversions of every chord, major, minor, whatever it is, your seventh chords. You should have these down without having to really think too much about it. I mean, I'm not super fast on piano. I've got some little jazz chops here and there. But if I need to, I can figure out a cool voicings, relatively quickly. Stuff that it's hard to imagine these things. I just played an F in second inversion with an E on top. It just sounds kind of cool, but there's no way I would be able to just, out of thin air, imagine what that's going to sound like completely. I mean, you can get maybe a rough idea, but... Okay, so let's move on. Let's see. Have you tried integrating jazz ideas into your orchestral composition? What works, what doesn't? Well, yeah, I mean, I love kind of jazzy or harmonies, so anything that's kind of a little bit more crunchy, we should say, using cool jazz chords. Some of the techniques of jazz composition to me are very applicable and offer kind of a different way of thinking about composition. So if you're composing classically, at least for me when I compose classically, I'm thinking very melodically and I'm thinking formally, like where I am within a theme or within a piece formally, and that's helping me make a lot of decisions. But in a sense, jazz simplifies it and goes with the more standard like A section, B section, C section, or whatever. And a lot of it is based in chunking things into 2/5 progressions or standard progressions, 1/6 2/5 for turnarounds or something like that. And so if you start to think like that, you can do, let's see. Right? This may be one phrase, and you just set your chords up off of that. And then you go to a different 2/5 1. And then you can move, by half step. And I've moved back to C there. So basically what I did is I did a 2/5 1 in C major, right? And then I think I did like a 2/5 1 in D major. Then I move up by half step. So I went from D major here and move up by half step to an E flat minor chord, which is a 2/5 1 in D flat major. And then I move up by half step again to D minor, and we're back in C major. And it always sounds like it works, and it sounds like it works is because built into the 2/5 1 is this resolution, right? Good voice leading, everything seems to move very smoothly from one thing to another. And so when you've resolved, you're kind of on a point of repose, and then you can move around to lots of other chords. I went to here to E minor 7, right? But I could have easily gone, then maybe here. Let's see. That was a 2/5 in F sharp major. So having that built-in resolution of 2/5 1 is a common thing in jazz tunes. You look up a bunch of jazz pieces, you'll see that everywhere. And it's just a simple way to move around a piece and make a lot of progress quickly. And as a classical composer, using that 2/5 1 pattern all over the place, we look at that as, oh, that's a cadence. But kind of traditional jazz composition looks at that as that's just a little progression that you place all over the place in your compositions. And there's lots of these things. I mean, there's, the rhythm changes. Sorry, I was trying to play that with one hand, but. So I guess one of the core skills that you learn when looking at jazz tunes is you pick up these stock phrases. Nice D major on top. So yeah, and then on top of it too, if you're learning jazz, I would highly recommend learning some cool voicings, right? Because that gives you a lot of facility on the piano to move around quickly, to hit chords, to figure, And I could take this. This sounds jazzy, but you could imagine this as like, let's see. Well, it's still kind of jazzy. I mean, with the right kind of orchestration on that, that could very much sound like. That could be a piece by Ravel for all we know. He had a very jazzy sound to my ears. Yeah, Gregory, thank you for the question. Let's see, move on here. Charles asks, do you compose choral arrangements? I don't really do a lot of stuff with choirs. I probably should. I'm friends with the people who run the Los Robles Children's Choir here in Ventura County, and they're getting ready to go to Carnegie Hall, I think. So they've got a good choir, so I should probably tap them and try to compose something for them. But yeah, I mean, as far as kind of the most up-to-date stuff happening with choirs, I can't really tell you that much. I'm a big fan of Morton Lordson's music, and I mean, there's a bunch of great choir composers out there. I would just recommend, as usual, if you're really into something, try to get a score, try to read it, try to transcribe it by ear, and then have the basics of voice leading and counterpoint and harmony down, and I think things will probably work out for you. And what's great about composing for voice is that everybody's got a built-in instrument and you all know how to use it. Now, whether you're a great singer or not doesn't really matter. Can you sing through your lines? If you write a line for a tenor, la, 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 whatever. Yes, that was from Mozart. And no, those are not the words. I don't know the Kyrie words. I probably should too, but okay, let me move on down here and say hello to everybody else who's joining us. Kikistani, ABCDEFG. Let's see, we got Elias Fa. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Okay, let's see. Oh, Ilka, you said you applied to music school to play piano. Very cool. Hopefully, yeah, you do get in. And while you're there, if you're at music school, I'll tell everybody else, take advantage of the amazing opportunities. There's going to be, other composers. There's going to be instrumentalists. You can get to know them well. Try to get the ensembles to play your pieces. Try to get a chance, even just for a couple minutes, to conduct the orchestra. I mean, you can really get away with a lot of stuff there in terms of just interfacing with the teachers and telling them what your goals are, I think. So yeah, looking back, I absolutely did not take advantage of everything that was at my school, and I wish I did. So let's see. Robert asks, am I still working on my symphony? Absolutely. Yes, I'm working on my symphony. And, I'm trying to, I've been having a lot going on just in general in our lives, with 3 kids and just day-to-day stuff, doing art of composing. And so it's coming along slowly. I wish I had more time to sit and devote to the symphony. I'm also still finishing up 2 film scoring projects right now. That being said, every chance I get, I sit down and I try to write out thematic material, trying to figure out how the thematic materials is interconnected. What can I take from this theme and add to this one, and vice versa. And it really, in just the last 2 weeks, I feel like I've got some core ideas that I'm actually really happy with. I started labeling out some theme ideas. Maybe this will be the main theme, or this will be the subordinate theme, or whatever. But it's still in a kind of a weak state. So maybe the next article that I'm going to post is probably going to be, an update. We're going to take a look at the themes and, try to pull them apart a little bit. What's making them work? What's maybe potentially not making them work, and how we're going to go ahead moving forward with structuring out the symphony. So, if you want, I think it was a good time to follow along, because these same questions I'm pondering right now, you'll probably be pondering if you're trying to play or to write a larger work. So I would say, start the process, because it's a big deal. There's no way around it. It's a major work, just like writing a novel or anything like that. Takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. See, Jack is asking, have you ever wanted to write something for solo instruments other than piano, something like a concerto? Well, yeah, I've written a little bit for trumpet. I've never written a concerto specifically. I've written for solo guitar without accompaniment, and I've written like duets and things like that. So, most of my practice composition, I would say, is devoted to piano pieces, where I'm really working out stylistically, how I like to make things. It's a great way to practice, because it's simple enough with one instrument, but it's complex enough with 10 fingers. You can do a lot on the piano, and I feel like I've got a pretty strong grasp of the strengths and weaknesses of each of the main orchestral instruments. Like everybody else, I'm still learning and still growing as an orchestrator and as a composer. However, I haven't sat down and devoted, to single instrument or concerto style pieces all that much. It's because I think, once I got my chops to the levels that I want with orchestration, a lot of that has just been put into scoring films, and especially when I was going through the film scoring program, I was just doing tons of little cues every week, just working on my chops. So, yeah. Let's see. Colby's asking, do I ever arrange music? Colby, I did a lot of arranging when I was younger. In my teenage years, in college, I did a lot of arranging, and I really enjoyed it. And I think arranging is a great, great skill, and a great thing to practice. I mean, you can, in a sense, it takes away a lot of the fear of composition. I know fear maybe is a strong word. However, I think there is an underlying fear when you sit down to compose. Will I be able to make it through this session? Will I be able to finish this piece, in the way that I want to finish it? Will it be at the level I want? With arranging, you can take a piece that you already like. You like the structure. You can take the time to figure out the chords, the harmonic analysis, the melodic analysis, or really dive into what makes that piece work, try to make it your own. And then on top of that, you get the practice of kind of structuring that out, making it a much larger piece and turning it into something that was special, or a little bit more special for you. So yeah, arranging, great thing to do. I haven't done a ton of arranging recently. Once again, just because most of the stuff I'm doing is original film composition, that takes up probably the majority of my compositional time, and then everything else is just devoted to art of composing. So yeah, arrange away. It is a great skill, definitely a great skill. Let's see. ABC is saying, let's see, the Beatles wrote as many pop standards of 10 out of 10 quality in 3 or 4 years as almost every other group that wrote in the last 50 years. Why are their melodies and songs so amazing? I can't even write one. Okay, so I think this is a good topic to broach, because really the Beatles are an interesting, they're just an interesting study. I mean, if you look at how they grew up, right, as a band, obviously they spent a lot of time playing in clubs in, I'm sure all over England, but, Liverpool and probably London and stuff, starting to gel as a group. And when John Lennon and Paul McCartney really sat down to write tunes together. I think part of the magic, and some of it is magic. Like, why did that creative group work so well? And I think it was the mixture of personalities, because I mean, if I'm honest with myself, I don't like a lot of solo John Lennon music. I don't like a lot of solo Paul McCartney music. However, when they came together, it just created something special. And I wish I was a little bit more of an expert on the Beatles, I guess. But just like anything else, I'm curious. I'm going to go to Music Theory Online. And I highly recommend this for people as well as Google Scholar. Let me see what articles we can find on this, because let's see, Beatles song. All right, let's type that in. Let's see. So I'm on the Music Theory Online search engine here, and you've got an article called Form and Voice Leading in Early Beatles Songs. That could be interesting. Let's see, Proceedings of the Beatles 2000 Conference. Let's see, Review of the Beatles as Musicians, which I assume is a book. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Well, I think I've talked about this one before. This was an article on the Cadential 4 in rock. And, in a sense, yeah, the Beatles, they've got a ton of hit tunes, and I'm not saying that any of this is going to lead to you writing a bunch of hit tunes all in a row. But also realize that there's a bunch of Beatles songs that I don't listen to, and you probably don't listen to all that often unless you're just like a really big Beatles fan. I mean, most people, I think, listen to the number one hits, right? Help and Hey Jude and Eleanor Rigby and stuff. But there's a whole bunch of albums that they put out, and there's a bunch of tunes on those albums that I really don't listen to all that often. And what that tells me, and what that should tell everybody, is that they wrote a lot more music than what actually became super well-known and super popular. So that's one of the critical steps right there, is that you need to write a lot of music. That's part of it, is that you just have to sit down and write a lot of tunes, and you have to practice and play those tunes. You have to modify and refine those tunes, right? You probably need to be getting feedback. Now, all of that happened naturally by them writing tunes, playing them as a band, practicing together, going through the recording process, and playing those at clubs where either the audience liked it or they didn't like it. And so these are critical things that anybody can be doing. And if you want to be writing, 10, like super awesome tunes, you need to spend that time writing a whole bunch of tunes. It's the 10,000 hour rule, and I think Malcolm Gladwell actually talks about the Beatles a little bit in that book, and saying that they put in their 10,000 hours. Their 10,000 hours weren't the same as Mozart's 10,000 hours or Bach's 10,000 hours. They were different, but they were 10,000 hours. They were dedicated to improving their craft. Now, when they started recording with George Martin, I think that was another huge influence on them. Adding the strings to Eleanor Rigby, that kind of stuff. That takes it up. And part of it is that that is a little bit of the magic, is the arranging, the recording process, and having those other wise mentors in that process with you. I mean, I don't know the chords, but imagine if Eleanor Rigby was like this. Eleanor Rigby, right? How boring compared to adding that magic of the cellos. I can't remember. I think there's violins in there. I don't know what the actual string section is. But the magic of the arrangement itself is, I think, what really makes that tune really special. And so, don't be afraid for feedback from other composers, from your friends, things like that. I think it's, in a sense, it is a little bit of a collaborative art. We don't have to all be Beethoven, cursing people for wanting to have any changes to their parts or anything like that. So that's a good question, though. I mean, if I had the answer, I would be writing hit tunes, and I'd probably be a millionaire right now. So I don't have the exact answer, but I do know part of the answer is time, effort, writing a ton of tunes. That's where it starts. And trying to learn, expand your mind, expand your style as much as possible. Mm, okay, Elias Fa is asking, what should be the first step for a beginner composer? Well, I think you have to take into account where you're coming from. Like, what's your background a little bit? If you're a beginner composer and you can't read music, I would say learn to read music at this point, and uh, you know, get the basics down. We talked a little bit about playing instruments earlier, but have the basics down for some instruments so that you can get feedback on your music instantly, right? If I have an idea, da, 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 right, then I can sit down, I can write that down somewhere. Um, Once you're beyond that, just the absolute basics, though, it can be a tough question. How do you approach uh, this big web of knowledge that you need for composition? And it's something I've been thinking about recently a lot more. And I guess it's something that I want feedback from students. And so, maybe people here on the symposiums we can kind of experiment a little bit with this stuff. But I've been reading just a lot more on Partimenti, on the way composers like Bach taught their own students, and how great composers in the past would have been taught harmony and melody and form. And I think what we really need is an integrated way of teaching composition, and that's in a sense what Partimenti is. And if you haven't heard of the concept of Partimenti are these like shorthand ways of writing out compositions so that you can develop them as a learning composer, right? You take this; it's effectively a baseline, a figured baseline that gives you a structure. It gives you, effectively guide tones for how your melody's going to work, harmonically, how you're going to go, where you're going to modulate, things like that. And then it allows you to modify and build off of that. And I read this one article also on. Let me find it real quick. I think it was called. Yeah, it's called. I'm going to post it here. It's called Prelude to Partimenti. Or Partimento, however you want to say it. How do you spell that? Partimento, like this. Partimento. So I just posted the link for anybody who's in the chat, and I'll actually post it here in the description for this symposium. But what I'm not going to go through the whole article. A very interesting article talking about this thing called the Ling Manuscript, which was a book of Partimenti that was well known in Germany for many years. Bach used it to teach his students. And, don't be afraid to learn some of these kind of more ancient sounding techniques, because I think as a composer, this stuff is really useful. Now, I'm not a great thorough bass player, but what I'm going to do here, I'll pull this up. Let me... I'll pull up this window so you can see the example. Let's see. Good. Here we go. So this is an example of a Partimenti, and this is... sorry if you're looking at the blank screen for a minute. But this is effectively what a Partimenti is. It's a bass line. And I'll if people are commenting, I'll get to those comments here in a minute. And what you'll have here is you've got rules for how to harmonize above the bass line, right? And a lot of it is up to the person actually playing along, but you are expected as a composer to be able to take this and either improvise a piece. In this situation, it's a prelude. In other situations, maybe a fugue or something like that, which to modern ears, saying improvising a four-voice fugue, that sounds like an incredibly difficult skill, but that was par for the course back then. Now, I also realize that fugue is not the most applicable style of writing composition nowadays. However, being able to write a fugue, being able to write counterpoint, being able to write a traditional prelude, amazing skills for any composer to have right now. Now, with that being said, if we look at these chords, right, we're starting on D minor, and then it's got a here it's effectively you're keeping a pedal tone, right, but you're playing a different chord in the right hand. And then it starts to go down. Let's see. And then we 7. Right there, it's got a built-in modulation. If you can't see this, I'm on measure 3 on that D right there. Let's see. So being able to take something like this, though, and now you can modify this. And what this article goes into is showing you that 4 of the two-part inventions from Bach that he used as educational pieces for his own children and for his students, and as pieces to teach them what good composition should look like. He actually uses this exact model for prelude, and from the well-tempered, sorry, not the two-part inventions, but from the well-tempered clavier. Now he modifies it, but if you read the whole article, you'll see how he goes into all this stuff. But he uses this for other ones as well, and it's a great learning tool for any composer. So you could start here, right? Right, I'm just kind of improvising a little prelude based off of this piece, this prelude that's in the Langlois manuscript. Now, all this being said, what this effectively does for us is it gives us the ability to have a structure, to have harmony laid out for us, to have a bass line, and to figure out a soprano line that works against that bass line, this two-part counterpoint, you know. We can use this as a model for our own small compositions, and this is something I'm really seriously thinking about and figuring out how am I going to integrate this into the Academy, into Music Composition 101, to add a little bit more to give structure, because it's something that I see in beginning students a lot is that a beginning student will often seem to kind of I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, kind of waft around in the same area. You know, you'll see a lot of it'll be a lot of that kind of stuff, right? It's like where's this thing going? And then maybe they'll try something like, I'm gonna modulate here. Let's see. Yeah, they did it, right? Yeah, and it's just like things don't seem to know where they're going, and what a Partimento gives you is it tells you where to go in a sense, right? So even if we simplify that a little bit more, writing theme and variations is effectively what you're doing. You're taking a piece, you're either modifying it in some way. You may extend parts or add a couple little bits here and there. But if you take a theme that you really like, modify it and start doing themes and variations off of that, that is a great thing to practice, because you start to, I guess, internally understand how to structure your pieces. How often should you stay in a key area? How often should you maintain a single idea before moving on to a new idea? In a sense, we have the textbooks, and those are great compositions. So Partimenti are specifically pedagogical pieces, right? They're things that you can practice very specifically as a composer that I think are very good for you. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a piece that you love and try to do themes and variations off of it. And it's been done for hundreds of years by every great composer. I mean, you've got the Diabelli variations by Beethoven. You've got Brahms. He does variations on a theme by Haydn. You've got Rachmaninoff, which is the Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini. And that's just a few. I mean, there's tons of them out there. I can't remember the actual German name, but the variations on Twinkle Twinkle Little Star by Mozart. You name it. There's a lot of these themes and variations out there, and it's because it's a way for you to very clearly build your skills and practice a lot of these techniques without getting overwhelmed with where am I going with this piece. Okay, so hopefully that is a helpful answer for you. I mean, just taking music, trying to pull it apart, learn from it, and vary it, modify it, add ornaments to it, practice, use it however you can write out a structure for yourself. I mean, if you've got to take it, write out the chords underneath and use that as your structure, and then try to improvise a little piece off of it, as I was talking about earlier. Try improvising a little bit, a melody. Try improvising. Just don't play standard chords. Right? Try doing a little two-part counterpoint. Try to come up with something. Try to keep a motive going through this, through the whole piece. Try to, practicing that kind of stuff. One, it can be fun, but two, it really, especially if you're trying to do it analytically, you're not just noodling. Like you're not just sitting back and just playing a bunch of notes and hoping something sticks. And in fact, reading something about Bach. It was from Forkel, this guy who wrote a biography about him, one of kind of the first biographies about Bach. And he said that Bach called people who sit and play a lot of notes trying to figure out what's going to stick, he called them harpsichord knights. So it just all sounded very kind of out of date but hilarious at the time. So I loved it. Okay, let me move on to some other questions here. Let's see. How do you approach transcription from a piece into a piano reduction? Do you even do piano reduction for analysis purposes? Yeah, occasionally I do piano reductions of pieces. I would say before you start setting down your notes in the piano reduction, try to go up and down and look at first what is the harmony. I mean, you may have 50 parts, it looks like, but you can probably boil that down to what is the actual core stuff here. Figure out the underlying harmony, write out the bass and the melody first, I would say, is probably the core things. And then you should probably also, try to, I mean, it depends on what the goal of the piano reduction is. Is it for you to be able to play? Because that may restrict a lot of how much you write down. Is it really a piano reduction, or is it just a orchestral reduction where you say, this is what the brass are doing, this is what the trumpets are doing, this is what the clarinets are doing here, and everything else is superfluous, and you really want to get down to what's the core of this, orchestral texture that's there. But yeah, I would say start with simple analysis of the piece. Look at the form of it, look at the harmony, look at the core. What is the focal point idea in every measure, right? There's usually something that the composer wants you to focus on, and in a sense you should be focusing on that with your piano reduction. Let's see, there is at the end of Mahler's Symphony No. 1, the big build-up. He's got let's see, right? That was my little personal piano reduction of that movement, or that moment in the orchestra. And if you actually listen to the whole thing, there's a lot going on. And hold on, somebody is knocking at my door. I'm busy. That's probably my 3-year-old son. I'm hoping. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So my little piano reduction of that moment, I do have, the... Let's see. I kind of outline the chords a little bit. Here I hit, it's a 7th chord, A7. But the critical thing, let's see, is the melody and this chromatically descending bass line. and that's what's cool about it. And is if you find what is the core focal elements that you want, it works even without the fancy orchestration, even without all the pedal, everything like that. I can just play it. Right, and that really, when you get down to it, that's what you want to learn from it. That's what you're probably trying to learn from it is why does this piece work musically? Now obviously, if you're looking at why does this work orchestrationally, then piano reduction is helpful for pulling out what are the core elements. But you really want to look at how's the spread of the actual orchestration. What are the different auditory streams coming into you? How do they blend together? What is perceptually very salient, what's kind of just floating out in the background as background noise that's supporting those primary streams. So let's see, let's move on to another question here. Jack's asking, how important is drafting in your composition process? I mean, drafting as as separate from sketching. Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by drafting. The way when I've sat down and I've tried to analyze how it is that I compose, I've got what I call the pre-composition stage, which is everything that happens before actually putting notes down on paper. So it could be as innocuous as having a clean environment that's kind of quiet to work in, or it could be, getting a good night of sleep beforehand or going on a run. Those kind of things are actually, I view as part of the process, but it's kind of pre-composition. So getting, just your life in as good order as you can so that it doesn't get in the way of your creativity. After that, I move on to sketching. I mean, if you've read my article, you've seen this. Sketching to me is the process of just getting your kind of core rough ideas down on paper as mnemonic devices. That means not necessarily all the fine details of it, but just getting down what it is that you need to be able to remember these ideas and use them later on. After that, though, I have what I call structuring, right? And part of this is I think the word process is actually a bad word for this, because a lot of composers, I believe, and myself included, we don't necessarily go through this process in a processual linear way. We don't go from this thing to that thing to that thing to that thing and we're done. It's usually a lot of back and forth in between. I've sketched ideas and then I move on to structuring out, and then maybe I move back to sketching new ideas, right? So I'm almost looking at it, and as a core idea for music for me and for composing is, what is your compositional focus at the time? My focus is sketching. My primary thing that I'm doing right now is structuring. However, my focus can deviate really quickly and say, oh, I'm going to do this real quick. Maybe it's on the periphery of what you're doing. You may be structuring out your piece, which is what I kind of think of what you're talking about with drafting, is laying out how one part follows the next. How do they connecting the dots? And obviously, that is critical in any composition. I mean, you can't just... some people, I think, start at bar one and go to bar whatever the final bar is, and I think some composers work like that. However, that's not how I work. I kind of chunk items. I write a theme and I write another theme and I figure out how do I expand this theme and how do I connect these two themes together. And so that structuring part of it is critical for anybody. What I found works best for me is to start with handwritten themes, really work out the core ideas by hand. I just enjoy that more. And then I'll usually take those over to Sibelius and start to work on them separate from, away from writing by hand, working in Sibelius, because I can copy, paste, I can modify, change, save new versions really quickly. I've just gotten, I've been working with Sibelius for so many years that it's second nature to me. And in fact, here, I'll pull up one of my ideas, see if I can find something. I got to find my symphony folder. What I've done is I've created a folder on my computer where I'm starting to collect all my symphony ideas after I've sketched them out. So let me pull this up and see what this is. This is actually, I've done a little bit more on this, but it's very, very rough. And I was kind of working out little ideas. So let me Let me switch to this view right here. So this is an example of something I may do. First I wrote this by hand on the piano. Right, so that's an idea that I wrote down as a possible theme, thematic idea, and then I wrote down just a very rough orchestration that I was thinking about with the strings at the beginning. So obviously not the greatest ultimate playback that you're ever going to get, but. So that's one idea. Let me see what else I've got here. Some of these I can't remember which ones I liked and which ones I didn't. But yeah, hopefully, Jack, that let's see, you have a comment here. By drafting, I meant the way authors and writers use the term. You finish your first draft. Yes. Okay. So following the structuring phase, then for me, or process or focus, however you want to look at it, then it's a matter of refining, right? And you kind of switch between refining the orchestration, compositional ideas, integrating things a little bit more. So yes, getting to the end of your piece to me is a critical step. And I think that's important before you can really fine-tune your piece. I think you do have to get to the end with a rough structural kind of idea. So you may not have full orchestration. You may have orchestrational ideas, right? You may just take some notes. You may say, I want flutes to play this, or this calls for a soft, sustained string pad underneath or something like that. However, I don't spend a ton of time working out the total orchestration of everything. I will really try to get to the end, and what I say is you get to know your piece really well, and then you can make better decisions about what works and what doesn't work. And absolutely this happens when I do film scoring, and what's great about film scoring is you have a set amount of time. You have to fit in that time. You have to have some kind of structure to piece. You have to make choices about what feels like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so you usually have very good deadlines. So you end up scoring things or writing really fast. At least I personally do when I'm scoring. I end up writing usually really fast, as long as there's a deadline. When a director I'm working with, it's like, yeah, we'll get to this, finish this thing eventually. And then it's like, just give me a deadline. Tell me when it's got to be done, and then I'll be done with it. But usually when I get to the end of my cue, my son is hanging out outside the door, so he's looking at me, yelling something. When you get to the end, that's when you start to see, this idea, it doesn't work with what I did over here, and I like this one better. It seems to fit better. So I'm going to modify this first idea to really fit better with this one, or I'm going to take this motive that I only came up with at the end and figure out how to fit that in with the main theme over here, or fit that in with the accompaniment. And so, yes, getting to a first draft is a critical step, and that's got to be the point at which, at least for me, I really start to love composition. I think I'm a fine tuner. I like to tweak things. I like to really, play with the articulations, the dynamics, and things like that. And to me, that's when I really come alive in the composition process. It's when I make it through the most painful period, is getting your basic ideas down, getting the thing structured out to get to the end of your piece. That's the really difficult, hard part. Everything after that, I think, at least personally for me, is really enjoyable. I really like getting your piece to the point where you're proud of it. You can put this in front of players and they could play it. And a part of that is just, letting time take its course and spending enough time on your piece. So yes, get to your first draft, but that can't be the end. You got to write, you got to rewrite, you got to take things out, you got to add, you've got to, rework ideas until they're all gelling. And then usually my final step is fine-tuning the orchestration in the parts. I'll go through each and every part, And one thing I like to do is I like to sing through the part as much as I can because, one, I think singing in general is a great way to phrase any instrument, even if it's violin or piano or whatever. Thinking about how we phrase our ideas speaking and how we phrase our ideas singing and where we want to take breaths are usually very natural places to put little rests, little gaps, things like that. And just don't think because a violin doesn't take a breath that their arms and their fingers and their forearms don't get tired playing. And so you want to give people breaks, and usually those natural breaks are places where you can add interest and change in the orchestration. So all of it feeds into itself. As you go through with the parts, you're like, wow, this is a great spot to switch over to viola maybe with the line, or to switch over to oboe, or to bassoon or trumpet or whatever. It gives you reasons to orchestrate, not just orchestrating for the sake of orchestrating. Part of for me personally, part of great orchestration is more than just illuminating the form. It's illuminating that focus. It's saying, this is the core idea. Everything needs to focus on this idea right now, and knowing where those natural breakpoints are in the music, knowing where the phrasing naturally needs to take a breath, where the form is a critical formal articulation point, like a cadence or the end of a phrase, the end of a basic idea. If you understand all this stuff about your music, orchestration becomes so much more enjoyable and easier to do, and you can actually say what the purpose of your orchestration is. Oh, I wanted this timbre to be the core timbre that everybody hears. Maybe it's some special timbre, like maybe you've got muted trumpet and flute. I hear this a lot in kind of 70s big band tunes, right? In fact, there's one called Hey Burner by Sammy Nestico, who's a great jazz arranger. If you listen to that, really cool sound. It's trumpet or muted trumpet and flute. But everything else has to fit underneath that, or else you're losing what's the focal point of your orchestration. And so now you can make decisions about that. Well, what's not going to stick out over a trumpet and a flute? Well, it's like, maybe very light saxophones underneath that. All just, right? In that situation, when he's got that going, he just goes with the straight rhythm section, because I think he knows that if he threw the trombones in there, or if he threw the other trumpets in, or if he threw the saxes in, they may overpower. Or maybe he decides later he's just going to do tenor saxes and 2 trombones, and they're playing little kind of light 4-part pads underneath. But the point is that you can make those decisions much better once you get to the end of your first draft, and you can look back at everything and say what's actually important. So great question. I like those kind of questions. Okay, let's see. Gregory is asking, do you ever find that composing with theory stifles compositional creativity and serendipity, and how do you balance the two approaches? Well, this is something I've thought about quite a bit too. I personally have not found that knowing the theory stifles the creativity. What does stifle my creativity, and I think it's related, and I think it's why people connect the two, is that there's things that I know theoretically, right? I theoretically know how to modulate from C to A flat minor, let's say, and I can figure that out. Is it under my fingers, though? Could I do that without thinking about it? And the answer is probably not. I'm going to have a lot of trouble just trying to improvise a modulation from C major to A flat minor on the spot. I'm going to have to sit and think about it. What is actually stifling my creativity at that moment is the fact that I haven't learned that theory well enough to be able to put it into practice without serious mental energy spent, right? So I'm going to have to sit here and say, I closed my Sibelius window. I'm going to have to sit here and I'm going to have to say, hold on. Let me open up the piano again. What would be a potential path? Looks like, we got, and of course it's on note performer too. Let's see. Right, we got that. This is going to be a tough one. Let's see. So we could figure out possibly a way to go from C major, right, to A flat major, which to me seems like it would be slightly easier. And we could probably do that through way of like maybe a little bit. It's kind of direct, but I mean we're trying to jump pretty big keys here. Right now we're in E flat, which gives us A flat major really easily, right? We just add the 7th. So now we modulate it in a relatively smooth way to A flat minor, but it was something that I had to sit here and think about, like, how am I going to actually accomplish this? Whereas now that I've done that, now I can sit there and I can do it. I learned that theory a little bit better, and now maybe when I'm playing, right? I just, on the spot, was improvising a little thingy here, and I got myself from C major to A flat minor, right? Now, there's 100 other ways you could cut that, and there's 100 other ways that you could modulate from C major to A flat minor. The point is that you either lock that in or you don't. If I sit here and I never play through that again, next time I want to accomplish that, I'm going to have to sit and I'm going to have to think about what it is that I have to do to get there. Right? Now, knowing how to get there is not going to stifle your creativity. It's not going to prevent you from having happy accidents, but not knowing it well enough to be able to do it while you're composing without spending tons of mental energy is going to mean that it feels like it's more work and stifling your creativity. But really what it is that you don't know that theory as well as you think you know it. So, no, I don't think theory actually stifles creativity. It's just the fact that we don't know that theory well enough to be able to kind of forget it and move on, move through that thing, right? But I think we would, I think I would be doing everybody a disservice to say that, yeah, theory stifles creativity. Now, you know, there are some famous quotes. Obviously, you got Debussy saying that, you know, rules don't make great works of art. Great works of art make the rules, and that's a paraphrase. And yeah, in a sense, that's true, but I think Debussy is kind of being disingenuous when in fact he was taught all the rules. He knows how to do counterpoint. You know, he knows how to write a piece in sonata form. Clearly, he knows this stuff, right? But what he's doing is he's taking what he knows and then he's starting to experiment. He's saying, well, they say that I can't move in parallel fifths, but I don't see any reason why we can't as long as I know why I'm using it. Right? That's a cool sound. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Am I breaking a theoretical rule? No, I'm not really breaking a theoretical rule. All theory is doing is trying to explain why we think something works, why we think something sounds good, and it's people thinking deeply about music, right? This theory right here that says I can go from 1 to 6 to 4 to 2 to 5 to 1, all it's explaining really is that a lot of people have done that, right? And why does that work? Oh, it works because there's a lot of common chords or common tones between all of those. Right? I barely moved my fingers the whole time. I was moving 1 or 2 fingers at a time doing that. I know that's going to work because of theory. I'm going to use it because I know that really well. Obviously, I can play that really fast. Now, can I play it as fast in A flat minor? No, clearly not. I'm making mistakes, right? That means I need to work on that theory a little bit more to internalize it, I believe at least. So I think that's a great question, and it's a myth that needs to be dispelled. This is the other thing about theory is you can come up with your own theory. That's why it's called a theory and not musical fact. If you have a theory that you can get the same kind of closure by moving to that chord, whatever that is, you know, record it, write it out, whatever you got to do, and figure out what is your theory about that music and why you think that works. You know, at some point, all we had was this kind of sound, and then at some point somebody said, oh, let's add this kind of interval. right? And now we've got a different theory. It's like, oh, that sounds prettier, I think, because we've got that, 10th on there, right? That's a theory of music. And so you can create your own theories of music. Obviously, there's some accepted common practice theory. There's things that people know are going to work. I always know that this is going to give a feeling of closure. It almost always works exactly the same way in every piece I've ever heard, right? And so that's about as close to musical fact as you can get. It gives you a feeling of closure. Now, does it mean that it's always the right thing to use? No, it's not always the right thing to use. And a lot of times you want to avoid that kind of stuff. You want to avoid the obvious theory, right? But that doesn't mean that you're not composing with a theory. Every time you do something that you like and you repeat it, you've created a theory, whether you've, written it out in a way that you can explain it to other people, or whether it's just a gut feeling theory, you still do it every time, right? So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I love theory. I especially love well-written, concise theory, which is why I've still been raving about the David Huron book. I just love it. It's like a really small book. Every chapter was like mind expanding. If you're talking about, harmony and voice leading and why music works the way it does. So check it out. David Huron, Harmony, or it's called Voice Leading, the Science of a Musical Art or something like that. Voice Leading, David Huron. Let's see. Let me move on to another question here. This is Oxter Brothers. I am a bit of an illiterate composer. I write with intuition and memory. How useful is it to learn to read, write in standard music notation? How long does it take, and where should I start? Well, yeah, I'm going to say it's absolutely necessary if you want to have a career as a composer, or if you want to do this for the rest of your life. You can continue to do stuff by ear, but that just closes you off to so many resources. I mean, beyond just music theory books and things like that. If you can read a piece of music, you can learn a whole lot from it, right? It's not just classical pieces that are written out this way. The greatest arrangers, they all know how to write in music notation, and you can probably find a lot of pieces that you like. You can find them written out as full arrangements, whether you want to transcribe it yourself or find somebody else's. Like, let's say you're into the Beatles. You can probably find a bunch of the Beatles tunes written out as real arrangements for notation. Somebody's probably already analyzed them. Knowing how to read and write in standard music notation, I believe, is a critical skill. And there's all these myths out there about, famous film composers and stuff that don't read music. Almost all of them learn to read music later on. So, probably the most famous one is Danny Elfman. Kind of started off not really knowing how to read. And I don't know if he knew how to read a little bit or a lot, or, just wasn't very good at it. But he absolutely can read and write music now, music notation. So yes, I believe it's a critical skill. Now, how long it's going to take, it could take you, a couple weeks to get really good. Could take you 6 months to get really good. Depends on how serious you are about it. What I would say, there's not a whole lot to it, right? I mean, you're talking, you've got a couple lengths of notes that you got to learn, and you've got to learn obviously what the notes are. And I would highly recommend learning treble and bass clef. We're learning both of those. But I would say probably the critical thing is to, once you do that, learn to play it on an instrument, because there's something about locking it in with muscle memory. Now, if you play guitar or you play piano or something like that, those are two great instruments, but it could be anything. Trumpet. I learned to read music on trumpet. That's where I really learned how to read. And I think there's something very useful about learning a single line instrument where you're not worried about chords and things like that. But with that being said, you could take the piano and you could learn to play just the right hand and just the left hand on simple pieces, get those like basic Bach pieces that he gave to his kids, this kind of stuff. Well, I know that this is not actually apparently a Bach piece. Right? It's a piece that he wrote out because he knew it was good for, I think it was for Anna Magdalena, which was his second wife. I can't remember. But he knew these are basic pieces that they can use to learn the basics of playing the piano or the clavichord at the time, or the organ or whatever. But you can just sit there and go, right? And if you pick pieces that are well known, there are recordings of them on YouTube and stuff, you can compare against what you've played and how it's supposed to sound. But locking it into your muscle memory is important. I still, almost all the time when I'm reading treble clef, my hand does the trumpet fingerings, right? If I see a D, I do 1 and 3. If I see an E, I do 1 and 2. If I see an F sharp, I do 2. These are the things that are so ingrained in my muscle memory, but, and I think this is a critical thing, that allows you to audiate much better, right? I can go boo da 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 da, right? I can play through the trumpet part. I can play through any part as if it's a trumpet part, and it allows me to kind of more intuitively understand the intervals and the gaps and things like that. And there's been other research on what actually happens inside your body when you audiate. And if you haven't heard this term, audiation is the ability to understand music in your brain, not just think about music, but to actually hear it and understand what you're reading to understand the music that you're reading without listening to somebody else playing that music out loud. And what they found is that throat muscles will move as if somebody's singing without actually singing. They're not putting any air through their vocal cords, so you don't necessarily hear it. But when you're looking at sheet music, your voice is doing ba 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 ba, right? It's doing that, but without making the sound. So I think there's something special about the muscle memory connecting those neurons to some kind of musical instrument, whether it's the piano, whether it's your voice, trumpet, oboe, saxophone, guitar, harmonica, melodica. It could be anything, a steel drum. I don't know what you play. But yes, learn to read music. Learn to connect that to a musical instrument. You'll learn it a lot better. Now, the question of where and how to start, I had a friend that he had a website called 1 Minute Music Lesson. I really liked his videos. I thought they were very clear, teaching what the different elements of music are. I think it was, let's see, let me go over here. 1 Minute Music Lesson. I'll post it here in the chat, and I'll also post it in the show notes. Learn to read music. 1 Minute Music Lesson. So yeah, that's how to start reading music. I would highly recommend, if you don't read music, definitely start to read music. And yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Let's see, Paul's asking, when can we look forward to another course? I especially enjoyed your sonata form course. This is a good point to talk about this. If anybody here is unfamiliar, I run artofcomposing.com. I have two quite extensive courses, the Fundamentals course, Music Composition 101, and the Sonata Form course, which teaches you how to develop your pieces, how to structure your pieces out, what makes a 8-measure theme capable of holding up for 29 measures. How does Beethoven approach that? We look at Beethoven Piano Sonata No. 1. And so the next course that I'm working on right now is my orchestration course, and I'm doing a ton of research on it. And I was hoping to have a lot more done, but I'm working out these ideas in ways that I feel like they haven't really been talked about very often. Things like the focal element of your orchestration, things like auditory streams and auditory scene analysis. How do you perceive music? How does the listener perceive music? And what is your goal as an orchestrator? I mean, how many people have actually sat down and said, the goal of this orchestration is to do this? It's hard to put into words, isn't it? It's hard to say the point of this is. So I'm trying to work out ways to make that possible. For instance, if you have sketched and structured your piece, you get to the end of your kind of first draft, right? You can go back and you can intelligently say, this is the focal point of my music here, and this is the focal point of your music there, right? We'll use as an example Beethoven, right? He's got... Right? After knowing that piece well, we can take a look at it, and he makes it pretty obvious, right? If you were to orchestrate that, you could say that that's got to be the focal element. Doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing going on. I mean, if we wanted to orchestrate it, we could probably start off with strings under here going, right? We don't necessarily have to keep that empty. Now, we could not. But being able to say that's the focal element, now we can make intelligent choices about the timbre that goes underneath that. How do we write a second auditory stream that supports but doesn't overshadow? Is it in the same range? Then we can talk about transparency, and transparency has real meaning. Whereas if somebody says, I like transparent orchestration, that doesn't have a whole lot of meaning unless you can intelligently say, I have a focal element and it's within the same spectral range on top of it, right? Now you've got dimensions, you've got foreground, middle ground, and background actually make sense in a way. So I'm trying to connect a lot of these ideas that, to me personally, have floated around. They have some meaning, but that meaning is not necessarily very clear. So all that being said, I'm working on my orchestration course. It's taking me a long time, and it's going to take a long time, but I think ultimately we're all going to be a little bit better off if I take the time. I don't want to just pump out something and say it's done. Here's another, here's another range of the violin and viola, and this is, on the string and off the string bowing, and there you go. That's all you get, So So yeah, thanks for the question. If you are interested in learning to compose music, everything I talk about here, I teach in the Academy. Music Composition 101. I mean, you're looking at 11 hours of instructional video, including all the exercise. Well, not all of them. Almost all the exercises. All the ones that really take a lot of creative thought. I go through, I record myself doing those exercises so you can see how I would approach, writing a small piece in small ternary form, or writing a sentence or a period theme, or how to write a chord progression, how to modify a melody, things like that. There's exercises, there's quizzes, there's a workbook, and obviously there's video. So I would highly recommend go to artofcomposing.com and check it out. And if you've never composed anything, you should sign up for the free course and take it. You can see the videos for the free course here on YouTube. Just type in how to compose music, and hopefully it should show up. It's under my channel, or you go to my main channel, and be sure to subscribe too while you're here. Paul is saying there's a number of orchestration courses available. One reason I really appreciate your sonata course is that no one else is offering anything like it, and you did a great job. Well, thank you, Paul. That's very nice of you to say. Yeah, I'm trying to approach things from a different angle. If you look at, I think part of the problem in the teaching of composition, at least from what I've seen over the last 50 years, and really the last 70 years or so, one of the core ideas in music was originality. You had to be original. You kind of had to break the mold in a sense. You had to figure out some new angle on something. And I am a traditionalist in the sense of, I say that we need to look to the past and we need to absorb and understand what they understood. I mean, I would say there's not many people out there, there's very few in fact, that would have the same level of understanding of how music works that Bach had, or Beethoven, or Mahler, or Ravel, or Debussy, or any famous composer from the past that really, their music has stood the test of time. Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn, these great composers. And I asked myself, well, how did they learn? What's out there that can tell us about how they learn? Well, there's a book on how Mendelssohn was taught, and Mendelssohn was only about 2 steps away from Bach. His teacher's teacher's teacher was Bach, right? I think it was something like that. You could read my article about it. In fact, it's one of my counterpoint articles. But how did he start him off? Well, he started him off with figured bass, right? He gave him bass lines, and he said, you're going to learn to play this on the piano, and you're going to learn to write out these 4-part chorales in figured bass. Then you're going to go through with these Partimento style exercises, and you're going to learn how to write pieces based off of these, and you're going to learn to play, and then you're going to learn to, proper counterpoint, and you're going to learn how to write a fugue. These are critical skills for every composer, but it's not just the theory of harmony. It's not just the theory of how to write counterpoint. It's actually taking things like Partimenti, these vehicles, and using them as things that you can build off of and internalize. It's more than just learning the theory. It's internalizing the structure and the thought process of the music. And this stuff is out there. And that's what I'm trying to do with my courses, is not just take what we do in the sonata form course, which I feel is different from a lot of other things, is we go measure by measure. We look at that, then we chunk those measures into what are the actual musical ideas, the thoughts, the musical thoughts. You've got a basic idea, right? And then you've got a repetition, and then you've got that modified. Sorry. You've got this integration in the theme. You've got these ideas, these little, these little turns all over the place that he takes here. He puts them over. He puts it right at the ending. He's got this, ascending thing, and then right. That's a descending arpeggio, right? Kind of an answer to. Right, he's taking his ideas, flipping it over. That's an incredibly powerful tool for you as a composer to be able to look at. How does he do that? How many times does he repeat this? Right. He repeats it 3 times instead of the standard 2 times that you see in a theme. So now you have a tool. You say he uses the tool of extension. He takes a formal unit, he adds it on to that theme, right? Or he adds it on to the really, I would look at it, say it's a presentation phrase if we were to look at it as a tight-knit theme, but he repeats now, not once, but he repeats it twice in exact repetition with a little change at the end. I gotta sit down and replay through that. It's been a while since I've actually played through the full piece. So with all that being said, thank you for the compliment. I try to make the courses practical above anything else so that you have actual tools to walk away with as a composer, and you're not just floating around like, okay, I understand why voice leading is the way it is. I understand the theory of this and that and stuff, but how do I actually use it? Well, the goal of Sonatiform course is to actually use it. We model that piece bar by bar. I mean, you go through and you figure out the harmony, you figure out the melody, you figure out the modulations, and then we model it. And then you can take that, you can say, I can now use these things as something to really, build off of. So, Ilka, I would say that you say you haven't started 201 yet, you're not sure if you're ready for it. Based off of the pieces I've seen you put out, I think you are going to be ready for it. I think if you start to read it, the first couple modules or first couple lessons are really they're building off of what you learn in the 101 course. Everything builds off of the 101 course. But if you can write a piece in small ternary form, you're absolutely ready. And I think it'll keep you motivated. You don't want to spend too much time on basics. You don't want to spend 20 years doing voice leading exercises, because what happens is you're going to get burned out and you're not going to want to do this anymore. So let me see. Let's see. This is from Jonah. How do you go about adding meaningful dissonant chords such as ninths and 11ths? Well, they can be part of your kind of normal compositional style. I mean, if I'm composing, I often use a 13th chord, right? This is all the time used. So understanding where a ninth is going, understanding where an 11th or 13th is going, understanding how those kind of extended chord tones resolve is critical. But you also have to think about where often are those used the most on dominant chords, right? So if you've got, right, you've got that, you could very easily go change that 7th chord to a 13th chord, right? Or you could very easily change it to a 9th chord where you go like this. Right? It's not going to sound bad at all because it's a standard type of extended, you're adding dissonance, but it's kind of acceptable dissonance. Now, if you want to add it, the best place to figure out where it's going to work is through the melody, right? So if you've got your chord progression, let's say it's just... just something like, you can very easily start to add extended chords to those, right? I just added a sharp 11, right, or a sharp 4, however you're looking at it. And then now I'm going to add a ninth here to that A minor, right? So I'm just adding, kind of in a jazzier way, I'm just adding these extensions on so that they're going to, rub in a very cool way. Or you could even have it resolve. And then here, that's also a ninth in there. Or I could add an 11th. Adding that D in there, it starts to get real crunchy. Right? It's just a matter of experimenting, finding those parts where you think it'll work. I find minor chords and dominant chords to be usually the easier ones to add those extensions. So you gotta, right? Playing around. You say they're adding a sharp 11th is not necessarily considered a modulation. Now, you got to think of modulation as you can tonicize chords, right? I've temporarily tonicized the G chord right here, right? But I can also just, right there, I haven't modulated to G, especially if I go, I just had that in the melody. So in the melody is a great place to have the extended chord tones. You can do things like jump to a non-chord tone that's called an appoggiatura, or you can, and then obviously if you want to resolve it, you can, or if you want to have kind of a more impressionistic sound, you can leave those unresolved. That's a good way to do it too. Let's see. So yeah, hopefully that's useful for you. Let's see. This is from ABC. I feel I'd benefit from analyzing music, but I've found it quite hard to figure out chords. Lots of notes that suggest other chords and things making me think my reading is incorrect. Well, first things first, let's say you're looking at an orchestral piece, one, you have to determine, is this a C score or is this a transpose score? If it's a transpose score, you've got to look at each instrument and say, what is this instrument? Is it a trumpet in B flat, or is it maybe a clarinet in A? You're going to have a different method of transposing that. So you also have to potentially transpose it. I think, looking at more modern scores that are C scores, probably a little bit easier, or sticking with something where everything's all in the same key. So maybe start with something like a string quartet by Mozart, right? It's going to be relatively clear, relatively interesting, hopefully, for you to analyze. Something like the dissonant quartet would be maybe a little bit pushing the limits in terms of this is going to be complex to do, but you're still looking at things that are hopefully easy to figure out. And then the other thing you have to look at is the clef. Are you in bass clef? Are you alto clef, tenor clef, or some other random, ancient clef that we don't really use anymore? So all those things have to come into consideration. I would say if you're doing this, though, start with like the strings maybe, or the C instruments as a guide. So the flute, the oboe, the bassoon, all the strings, things like that. You can look at those and say, okay, this is generally what I think everything is. And then all of a sudden I've got a horn here with no key signature and it's completely playing something different. You need to look at the beginning of the score, figure out what is that horn, what key is that horn in, and how do I need to transpose it? Is it a horn in F? Is it some ancient natural horn that they were choosing something else, a horn in E flat or something? So all those things, you may actually be reading them incorrectly. So, but yeah, it's definitely a great skill to have. And actually, probably the easiest one to start with is piano. Take some piano pieces and analyze them. Look at something relatively simple. It doesn't necessarily have to be a classical piece. Take these books of just, take a book of show tunes or something where it's going to be very clear. It's probably going to be like, and get good at analyzing music. That in itself is a skill that you need to have. So John W. asks, why does music take so long to learn? It just does. This is the thing, is you don't have to know everything to do music. You don't have to be the greatest player to play the piano. You don't have to be the greatest composer to compose something. And there's a lot of ways to short circuit this. If you want to compose a great piece, model a great composer's piece. Then modify it as necessary so it doesn't sound like you've just completely modeled it, right? Let me find. I'll play for you real quick. Let me find it here. It's from the Composition 201 course. This is actually what I write modeling it, and hopefully I can find the complete one. Let's see. I think this is it. So this is, we were listening earlier, right? Everybody should know that. And if you haven't heard it, listen to Beethoven Piano Sonata No. 1. But this is actually what I've written, and give. So if you know the piece, you can clearly see where I've modeled it, but I've made enough changes that it's my own. It's my own little piece here, and it's a great way to pick up a little bit of Beethoven and internalize it. Any piece that you love, any piece of music that is valuable to you, take the time and do this, and you'll learn a lot. So, and that's just the exposition right there. But yeah, there are ways to short circuit this, and don't take the long way around. There's a quote. I can't remember if it's like Cicero or something, but the way is long by rules and short by example. So if you find those examples and you learn from them and you model them, you'll pick up so much more that way than just saying, I'm going to learn that 1 can go to 5 and then go back to 1. That doesn't mean a whole lot until you can connect that, until you can. Oh, I see what he's doing here. There's 5, and then back to 1. Now you can see, he stretched it out. He has 4 chords in a row, and it takes up all 4 measures. He goes 1 measure at a time, or 2, however he does it. I'm thinking I played a lot, but I don't look at the music all that often anymore. But you can now internalize that. You can, right? I just use that as a model to play something new. And guess what? That kind of progression, if you write something that it doesn't sound like, no one's going to ever know that you just basically modeled that off of Bach, because that's so common. So many people have modeled that kind of progression that it's automatically your own, and it's automatically a part of the big dialogue of music that we all live in anyway. So I would say model away. Take those pieces that you love, analyze them. In fact, maybe this is the exercise that everybody needs to do this week. Find a piece that you love. Pick a relatively simple one or a relatively short one. I think a great composer for this kind of stuff is Chopin, because he likes to write a lot of these little pieces that are very approachable. The nocturnes are great, the waltzes, anything like that. Mendelssohn, you could look at the songs without words. Schubert has a ton of songs that you can model. Whatever you want, whatever really speaks to you personally, but something that's approachable. Picking the scherzo from Mahler's Symphony No. 9, probably not the best one to start with. It's going to be a little bit overwhelming for you. So that's what I say, start with something approachable, and then, pick it apart, model it, go measure by measure. If it's, right? If we take something like that, now we can look at the melodies. right? He moves from the fifth to the third. He hasn't hit the tonic in the melody. Maybe that's an idea that we go with. But maybe it's as simple as, right? I just took that. I made it something new. And I could even further, change that up. And I'm going to extend that, right? I'm going to take a formal I'm going to extend it again. Right? Now it's giving me all sorts of ideas. And that's the beauty of this stuff, is that you're not floating on an island of just, you have to be a completely original, new, creative thinker, and get that out of your mind. Learn from the past and be inspired by the past. I get a lot of emails from people asking me, I don't feel any inspiration to compose. I don't feel like composing right now. I have no ideas to start with. It's like, well, guess what? There's millions of hours of music out there, and a lot of it is absolutely amazing, well-crafted, beautiful music that is approachable, that you have access to on IMSLP. You can see the scores. You can learn to play it. Sit down, get inspired by something that you want, and rip it off. Absolutely rip it off. I'm not saying that, rip it off for a film score and try to tell everybody that you're an incredible genius. That's not the point. The point is that you have to internalize this somehow. You have to make these things muscle memory, and there should be a better word for brain muscle memory, right? Like neuronal memory or whatever, dendrite memory. I don't know what we're going to call it. But it's got to be something that is tacit knowledge, something that you just know is there. You just know you're going to be able to use it at that moment that you need it. And the only way that happens is through taking the time, learning to read, learning to write, learning to play these pieces, and then actually using them in your own composition. I mean, right there, I'm inspired right now. I kind of feel like going to that. That's the Nocturne in E flat major, and ripping it off, because I think it'll be an absolutely beautiful piece. And every time I do this, every time I sit down, I'm absolutely inspired by a piece. Usually it's the first couple measures that really get me going. And then after a while, it does become my own piece. I mean, I've written a ton of stuff where it's like, this was the thing that inspired me. And by the time I get to the middle of the piece, it's totally different. It's not connected at all. So I say that's something you need to do, whether you're a songwriter, whether you're a classical composer, whether you're a film composer, whatever you want to do. Whether if you were writing didgeridoo pieces, go find all the great didgeridoo pieces out there and didgeridoo it up. So, okay. Okay, well, we are coming to the end here. So once again, check out artofcomposing.com. If you haven't signed up for the free course, sign up for the free course, and learn to do this stuff. Give the world your music. I think we all need to just be doing positive, creative things. There's so much negativity and darkness in the world that if we focus on creating more beauty in the world, I think the world would be a much better place. Okay, Jonah gave me a sad face here. I think he wanted me to comment on something. How do you go about writing the rhythms, the thesis, and maybe you meant to write antithesis? I'm not sure what you meant to write here. If you're familiar with those terms, the arsis? I've never heard of an arsis. I've heard of thesis and antithesis. Arsis is the name of an American technical melodic death metal band. I don't think that's what you're talking about, but whatever. Let's see. I have found some documents and studying, but help me understand. Okay, so writing rhythms it doesn't have to be all that complex, and if you go about it kind of methodically, you can actually come up with some cool stuff. This will be the last thing we cover here. So let me go to Sibelius and pull up this window. And here we are. Okay, so we're going to start and zoom in a little bit here. We're going to take something really easy. Okay, so we've got 4 quarter notes. This is an exercise that I do in Composition 101, and I think this is going to be hopefully helpful for you. So you got to think about what are your tools that you can do kind of mathematically. Well, we can lengthen a note here, right? And now we've got a dot and an eighth and 2/4, right? You can shorten a note. And now if we have this kind of how it was before, we've got an eighth and 3/4. So now I've lengthened, I've shortened, and I can do that for longer values. I can lengthen it like this, right? I can shorten it even more. I can repeat notes. So we started with 4 repeated quarter notes, but I can say change this to an eighth, and then I can change this to an eighth. So now I've taken a rhythm, I can repeat it, and I can repeat a whole group of notes. I can take away notes. So if you go over here, I'm going to do this, and now we've got kind of a more interesting rhythm. And what we can do is, let's put this one here. We can flip that over. So now we've got 2, then we've got a quarter note here, right? And then we've got a rest, and we've got an eighth note. And so now what we have is, let me zoom out just a little bit more. We flipped it over, right? We've got retrograde on our rhythm. So now these are all ways to come up with really interesting rhythmic ideas. Lengthening notes, shortening notes, adding, subtracting, right? And if you wanted to, right, whatever, I feel like that's got to go there. Now, it doesn't feel necessarily like that flowed all that well, and that's something that you maybe want to take care of. But if I just were to add, just a simple Alberti bass down here, you'll start to feel the rhythm a little bit better. Right? I came up with some interesting rhythms. So yeah, I'm not too sure about arsis or thesis in arsis in terms of what that really means. I kind of subscribe to William Kaplan's views on form. So you've got basic idea, you got repetitions, you've got presentation and continuation and antecedent, consequent. Got pretty standard terms that I think we all know. And melodically, that's where you can really start to experiment with rhythms and notes and things like that. All in Composition 101. So if you're interested in this stuff, you can sign up. The Academy's $40 a month, or you can buy and have the course for life for $180. And I know for some people that sounds like a lot of money. Just realize you're paying a lot more for that to go to college, even one semester of college, and I guarantee you're not going to get as much practical information in probably your first 4 or 5 semesters of theory courses in college. And if you're going to college or whatever, you can get a leg up. But $40 a month to learn this stuff hopefully shouldn't be too much for anybody. And I believe it's a fair price, and I think it's very valuable information. And it's stuff that I do use every day in my own composing. I may not use every little piece of it in exactly the same way, but once you know it, you can play around with it, you can modify it, and you can make it your own. And that's what this is all about. It's taking the knowledge of the past, knowledge of other composers, and making it our own. So hopefully you enjoyed this Composer Symposium, and let me know if how it went and where you'd like to see things going. And have a good week and a good weekend, and definitely sit down, write some music, find some pieces that inspire you. And I think we all need to do this week, is find a piece and model it. Let's everybody model it. And maybe I'm gonna do that with that Chopin piece, and I'm gonna try to make it something really different. And let's see what we can do with it. Maybe I'll play that next week at the next symposium. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So thanks everybody for showing up, and I will see you next week. Is, unless my calendar says something weird on it, next week is a Friday symposium, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'll get the links up, and we can do what we do. Okay, talk to you guys later.